Welcome to Reddit Aliens. When did you realize, oh crap, I'm the one being creepy? Please remember to like, share, and subscribe. This was at the end of a 12-hour shift on my feet all day, so I was quite tired. I was driving home from a long day at work and decided to take the shortcut home, which was a dangerous, bendy, dark country road. It was about 22:30 and pitch dark. There are residential houses around the area, so it wasn't completely secluded, but quite secluded. As I'm driving, singing along to Taylor Swift on the radio, I see a young girl walking by herself. People wouldn't walk this road during the day. It would be too dangerous, so this was unusual. I barely noticed her and could have hit her as there was no footpath on this very thin two-way road. No road markings, sharp bends, no lights, and barely a speed limit. She had no reflective gear or lights on. There was no close call or anything as I was driving slow, but I didn't see her until I was only a few meters away. I drive past and then think to myself, God, she's either going to get hit by a car or worse. What the F is she doing walking down this road by herself this late? In my sleep-deprived state, I put the car in reverse and go back towards her. With hindsight, the look on her face was pure panic, which is now completely understandable. I too would shit myself at the stranger reversing their car back to me on this dark, secluded road. She takes out her phone to pretend she's on a call. I pull down my window and ask if she wants a lift to the end of the road or anywhere. She says no thanks, and presumably prays she doesn't get murdered, and I say okay, but drivers can't see you on the road, and I drive off home. Only realizing then how silly that was of me, and what a fright I must have been given that poor girl. What was I thinking? She was going to get into my car? I was looking for a new apartment and met this girl who lived in an area that I was interested in and worked very close to where I worked. I was interrogating her about her commute, which route she takes to and from work, where she goes shopping, etc., and not noticing that she was getting more and more uncomfortable. Finally, one of my friends realized what was going on and explained that I wasn't some stalker. Rather, I was looking for an apartment and trying to figure out what my commute might look like. The look on her face made me realize how uncomfortable I must have been making her, and explained why her answers were getting increasingly vague and evasive as I went on. I apologized profusely, and she was cool about it. I did end up seeing her often after that because I ended up moving into an apartment across the street from hers, and we eventually became friends, but bad first impression, to be sure. A few years from now, they'll probably all laugh about this, but in the meantime, what an awkward breakfast. Oh, I have a good answer to this. So this was back when my son was barely a year old. My son had a phase for like half a year back then where he was refusing to sleep in his own bed. So more often than not, me and my wife would have to keep him in between us in our bed, or he would constantly keep waking up and crying throughout the night. The problem was that I snore a lot and sleep quite heavily. So our routine most nights would be that I'd eventually wake up the kid with my heavy snoring. My wife would then have to shove me to wake me up and ask me to shuffle off out of bed and relocate myself to our bed sofa in the living room so she and the kid could go back to sleep. This happened so frequently during the period that we never really bothered to fold up the sofa during the day and always kept it made as a bed instead. Now, this particular night was no different than the others. In the middle of the night, I wake up from my kid crying and my wife nudging me, still heavily affected by sleep drunkenness and barely brought to awareness. Instinctively knowing what to do, I roll out of bed and shuffle myself out into the living room to crash on the bed sofa yet again. While I lay there and move around a bit to find a comfortable position, my hand suddenly brushes against something warm and soft. I almost think to myself, my mind is too focused on trying to get some sleep that it doesn't really process this new information yet. My hand, however, instinctively squeezes the object a bit to figure out what it might be. It's strange because it feels like my son's foot. Suddenly, the object jerks away from me. Oh, okay, my son is here. I half-awarely think to myself, I guess I assume I must have dozed off and my wife let me out here with me for some reason. I continue to lay there trying to sleep for another minute or two, but then the realization suddenly hits me. Oh shit, that is not my son. See, the thing is, I've left out from the story, and that I was completely unaware of in my sleep-drunken state, it was that on this particular night, we had guests staying over. It was not my son. It was my wife's friend and her 2-year-old daughter who were visiting us and sleeping on our sofa while they were staying over. So here I am, sneaking into their room in the middle of the night, crawling into their bed and squeezing their feet. And that's when I realized, oh crap, I'm so effing creepy right now. Well, trying to keep the rest of the story as short as possible, I obviously tried to sneak out of the living room as soon as I noticed it, hoping that no one noticed my unintentional visit. In the morning, the first thing I did was that I apologized. My wife's friend had noticed it, but luckily she had also heard my son crying, so she assumed there was no ill intent when I had evacuated the bedroom. Only a bit strange when I snuck in and laid down in the foot end of their bed. It was a full square bed, and they slept in a different orientation on it than I usually did. Still, though, I felt and still feel really awkward about it, even if I was almost 9 years ago now. I automatically lock our front door when we're home. Nice young man came to fix the internet the other day, and I locked the door behind him and then immediately said, "Okay, that was really creepy. I do it automatically," and quickly unlocked it. I was walking home pretty drunk one night, and I noticed a woman walking towards me looking uncomfortable, so I thought I would just take another way home and took a left before our paths crossed. Then she took the same road. I was like, oh man, I don't want to go this way now, it's creepy of me, so I decided to stop and head back. But as I'm heading back, she disappeared. Awesome. Then, I am nearly back to my original path, and I see she has stopped in a phone booth as I am just about at the phone booth. I freaking pause a moment to work out how to avoid her, but then think, okay, just go home, and I walk past her in the phone booth to go home. I just wanted to avoid this woman and made it so much worse. Depending on the size of the town you live in, I could see this happening, but it is odd. Okay, this turned out to be a total miscommunication, but it's worth sharing anyway. I met this guy a few years ago on a dating site. Both of us had usernames that weren't our own name, and we didn't have our face in our profile pictures. After we chatted for a day, we shared selfies and then agreed to meet up. We ended up having an amazing first date, and then several more. After about a few months of fun, he suddenly ends it. I was pretty heartbroken. This is where the creepiness starts. Around the corner from my work, there was a bar everyone went to, but it wasn't much my scene, so I used to trek a bit further to a jazz speakeasy bar instead. Never been there before, but decided to go after a few coworkers suggested it as an alternative. Well, it turns out his band plays there pretty often. I saw him there about 3 times and then changed workplaces and never went back. I ended up getting a job at a cafe in the middle of the city. There was no free parking nearby except for literally out the front of his apartment. Don't know why the council made the 50-meter strip free parking, possibly because of the council bikes there, but either way, it was the only place within walking distance I could park. Believe me, I checked. So for 3 months, I would park out front of his apartment every few days for about 8 hours. Eventually, I parked a few kilometers away and took an e-scooter. I'm back on this dating site, start chatting with a random dude with no picture and a fake name, and lo and behold, it's him. He blocks me once he figures it out. Then I leave that job and get another one at a restaurant. I'm driving past one night to show my friend where I work, and I notice that X is there. Next shift, I ask if he goes there, and turns out he's a massive regular, there all the time, buddies with the owner. Then they say, oh, you're the stalker X. They told me everything. Turns out he thought I followed his band tour dates to find out what bar they played at, stalked his apartment by parking out front for a few months every few days, and then scoured the dating site to find him again. He had been bemoaning to the owner and staff for months about this crazy ex-girlfriend of his, and here I was trying to defend myself. Luckily they believed me, but they obviously let him know I worked there because he never went back. So yeah, I wasn't ever intentionally being creepy, but our paths crossed so much within the several months after breaking up that it definitely looked that way. Poor guy. I was about 18 at the time and went to visit a friend who was in uni about 2 hours away. Caught the train there, and we got out to the club later that night. I see a very cute looking girl and try to initiate conversation. It does not go well, and I learn my lesson pretty quick and go back to the dance floor. This is the part of the story I remember clearly. Turns out, I had way too many Jaeger bombs that night and saw on the club's Facebook page the next day a picture of that girl with me dancing roughly 3 meters behind her face, looking so concerned, clearly aware of me trying to seduce her with dance. Yeah, glad I grew out of that one. Finally a chance to tell my story. So, I'm a photographer, male, and I wanted to do some night cityscapes from the roof of a local car park. Now this place isn't the safest. Last time I was there were some photographer friends. We were watching a drug deal go down. But I figured the risk I was taking was just a personal one. Besides, I had a great idea. I dressed completely in black and turned all the lights off on my camera as the car park was completely unlit. Any unsavory characters wouldn't even be able to see me. Yes, this is not a story written by a genius. Well, it sort of worked. I stood there in the inky black night taking pictures, feeling fairly safe in my invisibility. I had noticed a few cars on the top floor, but they were all empty. Then the door to the roof swings open, introducing some light to the scene. I'm still in the shadows though. I look to the door, and to my horror, I see two women returning to their car after a night out. This is the moment I realize the error in my plan of being a large male, dressed entirely in black, stood in the shadows of a dodgy car park. I have a decision to make. If they see me, they'll get the shock of their lives. Still, I'm in the shadows. It's still dark. Maybe if I stay completely still, they won't notice me. Reader, I chose poorly. It worked at first, but then the woman in front looked eyes with me and just froze. I was mortified. I had to save the situation before she had a heart attack. These were the words I chose. It's okay. Don't worry. I'm not a weirdo. Well, I mean, maybe I do look like a weirdo standing alone in a car park, but well, I mean, I'm not that sort of weirdo. I'm just taking pictures. Of the city. Anyway, it's okay. Don't worry, it's okay. If it worked because my pathetic attempt to find the right words had removed my menace from my appearance. But yeah, lesson learned about standing around in dark car parks. You might think the lesson should have been learned earlier, and you'd be right. My wife and I are at her sister's house, and I walk into the kitchen where I saw my wife talking to someone, I forgot who. Anyway, I started caressing her ass. As she turned around, I was mortified to see it was her sister, who looks exactly like my wife from the back, apparently. We all laughed about it, but I was completely embarrassed. When I asked my friend when she switched to a very specific shampoo and she just looked at me weird for a few seconds, I immediately explained it to her though. I happened to use the very same shampoo a couple of years ago, and I simply thought it suited her really well. She also knows I'm very smell sensitive, so that helps, I guess. Met this girl when I toured my college for the first time, and we started talking over the summer before I started there. Then we were talking nearly every day. School started, and she let me know she'd been accepted to study abroad for a semester, and that she'd be basically in an opposite time zone, and she didn't know how often she'd get to Skype with me, and that she'd miss me. So what did I do? Never left my dorm room, stayed on Skype constantly until the wee hours of the morning, and Skype called her the second she came online, every day, for weeks. In my defense, I thought we were building a LDR. After a few weeks, she finally told me it was creepy that I always knew when she was going to be online. I said, "Oh, no, I don't. I just wait up until it's daytime there." She paused for a second and said, "Haven't you made friends there yet?" It didn't really say anything because I got uncomfortable because, no, I'd sacrifice making friends so I could be around to talk to her. And it didn't hit me how weird that was until that moment. Big confidence hit. I'd had a hard time as a high school lesbian and thought college would be different. It wasn't. This is actually a great skill to possess, so keep at it. I remember most details people tell me about their life, and I can usually quote it back to them a long time after. Someone at work pointed out that it comes across as creepy to remember details like this and having the ability to summon it so quickly. She said it might make people think I was targeting them and keeping notes, etc., like I'm a stalker or something. Nah, sweetie. I'm a socially awkward people pleaser with amazing attention to detail, and I can't even do a push-up without needing to take a break halfway through. I couldn't hurt anyone. When I was in college, I wanted to take pictures at parties for the memories. However, people always looked at me weird and reacted like I was being creepy. But when other people took pictures, it was fine. I didn't understand it at all and felt sad. I then realized years later it was probably because I always brought my Nikon DSLR camera with me and everyone else just took pics from their phone. It just didn't click with me that people my age always took pictures with their phone all the time instead of a real camera. So in retrospect, it was pretty weird to think about your usual typical college rager in a dorm room, and then there's some Peter Parker looking guy standing there taking pics with his Nikon DSLR hanging around his neck. Former dancer. I was around 30 and just stuck in the mall with my wife. I spotted this girl that had just had the perfect frame for swing throws. I'm just imagining hip and basket tosses, getting lost in my mind, and was just staring at her dead-faced. Staring enough that I caught her attention. She asked me, "What are you looking at?" And I just deadpan responded, "I could just throw you around." She looked terrified. Then, when it all computed, I looked terrified, and I just grabbed my wife and told her we were leaving.